All right. Welcome back to week 11, everybody. Week 11 of 16. So, kind of winding down here on the other side of the semester as we get into not office hours, student hours here with Professor Clavell on a lovely November the 1st here. Opening up my window here because I had some technical issues earlier, so just kind of now restarting my computer and getting all my windows all set up here. But as always, I'll start off with the schedule, right? Take a look at the schedule, see where we're at here as we look at the week 11. Started off here. Cancel that. As we take a look here, you can see, give them the zoom. Zoomed it in, zoomed it out. There we go here. Chapter 11, the muscular system, getting through the muscular system. Chapter 10 is the muscle tissue. We're kind of right here in the middle between the Halloween and the second, as I broadcast from November the 1st here. And the exam, if I zoom out maybe just a little touch more here, you'll see the exam will open up next week. So next week we'll open up the exam for muscular system. That'll be on the 9th or so, and then we'll open that up until the end of the weekend for my online class, and you can see when my in-person class will be taking that exam as well. So let's take a look at what would be a component of that exam as we start to see as well. So if I get a couple of writing utensils here as well, give me a moment as I do that. All right, here we go. So the components of this next exam, as we saw here, is going to be chapters 9, 10, and 11. So joints, articulations, and movements all the way here till the muscular system. So when we talk about joints, articulations, and movements, we really did focus on, maybe I can maybe even zoom that in for everybody here so they can see that a little bit better. Give it that way. There we go. A little better. Give you one more click. Okay, so when we talk about the first topic here, joints, the idea of not only the primary joint that we talk about, the synovial joint, which is the joint of movement, and those have 6 different categories, but the other types of joints, right? Cartilaginous joints and fibrous joints are the types of joints that are structural, or we could call them in like a structural category. There's a functional category too, which is the joints that have no movement, synarthroses. Those are like your sutures of the skull, which is a fibrous joint. There are the little bit of movement, amphiarthroses, so like the symphysis, which is a cartilaginous joint, a fibrocartilaginous joint, they have a little bit of movement. And then those freely movable joints, which we spend quite a bit of time focusing on, which are the synovial joints. This also includes, remember that this section also includes all of the movements of the human body. So I encourage you to look at all the different movements of the human body, everything from the axial skeleton, which includes rotation, this kind of side bend that I'm completing here, right? It's actually called lateral flexion in either side. So lateral flexion right, lateral flexion left, as well as, we've got rotation, flexion, and extension. AB and adduction are also terms that we should be familiar with as well, as we talk about the movement concept of it. So the movement concept is going to be basically all of the movements of the body, all the extremity movements, as well as I mentioned, the axial skeleton. As it relates to chapter 10, muscle tissue, right? What are we looking at when it relates to muscle tissue? Well, muscle tissue, there's some main concepts that we should be familiar with. And the first is the gross and microscopic anatomy of a muscle tissue. So what is the structure of a muscle tissue? Gotta yawn. There it is. What is the structure of a muscle fiber? Then that fiber is wrapped into fascicles, right? Bundles of fibers, which ultimately make up the muscle tissue itself. And the muscle tissue, like let's say your biceps or your triceps, the muscles that we actually call a muscle, are the organ, right? And so the organ system is all the muscles of the body, but the muscle like your biceps contains, arteries, veins, nervous tissue, right? Every muscle is stimulated by a nerve, so there's nervous tissue, there's epithelial tissue, right? That's contained within the either the arteries, veins, or even lining some of the other tissues as well. And so all of those different types of tissues create what we have as the organ, right? Multiple types of tissues create the organ, and then from that next level is the organ system, which is just all the muscles of the system there. And so the macroscopic anatomy, as we mentioned, is the muscle organ itself, right? And then tapering down to the fascicles, and then from the fascicles is the muscle fiber. And as you move in down from there, you see talking about the microscopic anatomy, and that microscopic anatomy is that of the muscle fiber, and then we move into the myofibril. The myofibril is what's contained in the contractile proteins, right? The muscle, the components that are really responsible for contracting. I'm opening up the slides here as we start to talk about that. But sorry, where is it at? I think this is the slide I want. Here we go. All right, so you with me there? Let's see. Hopefully you can see that on my slide. Yeah, it doesn't look too bad, does it? But here's the concept, right? If we focus in on the first part here, the organ itself, right? So here's the skeletal muscle, and that is the organ. It's contained into. There we go. So the skeletal muscle itself is contained in a bunch of fascicles. We've got these fascicles that comprise the muscle. Excuse me. These fascicles are made up of a bunch of muscle fibers, and then ultimately those muscle fibers are what make up the myofibril, right? You know what? Might as well do it a little bit here. I'll just do a quick 5-minute for everybody. Take off my screens here, clear all the drawings. Oh, I see what I did. I used the pen. Okay. All right. Welcome back, everybody, to Anatomy and Physiology, here with your professor, Dr. Sean Clavell. And today we're going to talk about the gross anatomy of the skeletal muscle tissue, right? And we've kind of already hopefully identified the topic of the skeletal muscle being the organ, right? So the skeletal muscle is the organ. If I zoom in here for you right here, we'll see that the muscle like the biceps, triceps that we're familiar with or that we name is the actual muscle that's the organ here. So I'm going to highlight that here for us. There's that skeletal muscle. And it's contained. It contains a number of different components, right? So we've got uh, arteries there. We've got veins here. We've got nervous tissue. So the nervous tissue is actually kind of highlighted over here, right? You can see that there's a nerve, and we kind of know that because a nerve stimulates every muscle fiber. So it's going to come out into the muscle fiber component of that. And then there's connective tissue, right? So the skeletal muscle itself, if I take this off, the skeletal muscle itself is covered by a connective tissue covering called the epimysium, right? And even the epimysium it blends all of the connective tissue coverings of the skeletal muscle. So the skeletal muscle has a covering, the fascicle, which is a bundle of muscle fibers, has a covering, and even the muscle fiber has its own little connective tissue covering on top of the fact that, hopefully I'm not yelling too loud here, but on top of the fact that there is a cell membrane there, right? But there's the skeletal muscle. This is the organ here, and the organ is made up of a number of fascicles, right? So the fascicles are really just a bundle of muscle fibers, right? And ultimately, the primary component of these muscle fibers, and we should say this too while we're at it, that when we're talking about the muscle fiber itself, I think I can draw here. The muscle fiber is essentially the cell, right? So the muscle fiber is the cell here that we're talking about. And so this cell, right, has a structural protein by the name of a myofibril. And that myofibril is made up of myofilaments. And so, again, this term, if we haven't mentioned this before, this term or prefix myo refers to muscle. And so a fibril is kind of like a fiber-like protein structure that runs the lengthwise of the skeletal muscle. And so, as we see here, right, a single skeletal muscle, which is the organ, is composed of large bundles called fascicles, right? A fascicle is a group of muscle fibers or muscle cells. So there's the fascicles. Each fascicle is composed of a number of muscle cells, and as we mentioned, they're also called muscle fibers because of their long cylindrical shape. Primarily composed of those muscle fibers is the myofibril. This protein, the structural protein, is actually gives the ability to contract as well. And so maybe from the gross anatomy, we move more into the microscopic anatomy as we zoom into the picture of the myofibril, right? So if we zoom in just back here, if we take another shot here at the previous picture, here's where we're looking at, right? This is the next component here, the myofibril. So we kind of see the gross anatomy, and as we're going to move into the microscopic anatomy, mind you, this title of the slide might be not completely accurate as we talk about not necessarily the gross anatomy of skeletal muscle, but the microscopic anatomy. And so, as we talk about this microscopic anatomy, the myofibril here is composed of two types of filaments. Myofilaments, right? The two types of myofilaments, muscle filaments. There's the thin filament, and the thick filament. Right? The thick filament is referred to as myosin, and I'll type that out here for us. The thick filament is referred to as myosin, primarily because it's made up of the myosin protein, right? And the thin filament is actin. They are arranged in an overlapping pattern and create what's known as the sarcomere. So the sarcomere is the, does it have it there? It's the functional unit of a contracting bone, right? It is the functional unit of contracting bone. So you can see contracting bone, excuse me, of a contracting muscle. I'm thinking about that because the osteon, just like we've in previous sections, we talked about the osteon being the functional unit of compact bone, right? Like the functional unit of compact bone contains the Haversian or central canal, and then there's all those osteocytes and the lacuna inside of inside their concentric lamellae, and it makes this kind of trunk-like feature. And so that's the structures that we're looking at for bone, but particularly as it relates to muscle, what we have here is this sarcomere. And the sarcomere is, as I'm starting to draw a little bit, the Z line, this is the Z line or the Z disc on either end, right? And then the, as we've mentioned, the alternating thick and thin filaments will make the thick filaments red, right? And the thin filaments kind of that blue or purple color. And when I make the thin filaments here, the idea you'll see is I'll draw a little arrow here because the idea is that when a muscle contracts, the Z lines come together, the myosin pulls the actin in towards the middle, or as you can see here, called the M line. Now we'll talk about that in the physiological, in the muscle contraction component, but this is what's referred to as sliding filament theory, right? The muscle's gonna contract in towards the midline, the sarcomere, that is. And so that is the, more or less, the gross anatomy of the muscle. Maybe the microscopic anatomy might talk a little bit more about the actual proteins and how they physiologically move. And so, yeah, that's kind of the skeletal muscle anatomy, right? I think I should just label this slide here just skeletal muscle anatomy. So let's fix that. Let's just call it anatomy of, bang, delete that. Make it black. Delete that. What did I do? There you go. Bang. And so that's the anatomy of the skeletal muscle. I guess the next thing that you really want to review in chapter 10 would be this idea of skeletal muscle contraction and then relaxation, but the primary component here is that of the skeletal muscle contraction, right? The major steps of that muscle contraction being excitation, contraction, coupling, and then cross bridge cycle. And then chapter 11. Chapter 11 is really the skeletal muscles of the body, right? And so let's see here. It looks like I opened this is the one that I want. We'll see which one. But I do want to kind of reiterate. I did want to kind of just talk about a couple of concepts here, and the concept as it relates to chapter 11. The big concept is this: the idea. I got 3 rules for muscles. You know what? Let's do this. Let me do something. Okay. You ready to hit me? I'm gonna hit you with the 3 rules of muscles. Goes like this. Okay. So there are 3 common rules of muscles that help me to remember kind of how to orient biomechanics. When we talk about biomechanics, we're talking about the idea of how the muscles act around the joint and pull the bones, which act as levers, right? So a classic example is that of the humerus, and then you have your forearm. You could put a weight in your hand here, but ultimately your biceps kind of inserts a couple inches in front of the elbow and kind of works its way into the direction of that force. There's your weight. In that force. And so a muscle can really only contract, right? So that's the first idea, is that muscles contract. They don't push. They pull. They don't push is maybe one way to say that. They can only contract and then they relax. They shorten. Remember the topic of sliding filament theory here. When the sarcomere gets closer, so on a microscopic level, or even at a kind of a theoretical level, the sarcomere is getting shorter and contracting, and it doesn't like push. So the main thing is that muscles pull, they don't push, right? They contract and relax. That's the main thing that they do. They only work on the joints that they cross, right? So as we've mentioned, movements are usually the interaction of 2 or more muscles acting together or against each other. But they work in the joints that they cross. They only work on the joints that they cross. Right? My wrist, right, moves because the muscles in the front cross the wrist. They pull it forward, and the muscles in the back of my wrist pull it backwards. And then the third concept here is kind of the idea of fascicular arrangement. And we actually name our muscles on the direction of their fibers. Fascicular, right? Remember the fascicles that we talked about, the grouping of those fibers. And so those grouping of fibers run in different patterns. It's often demonstrated in a number of different ways. We can take a look at artistically. the direction of those fibers, right? So let's think here. If you've got where's a good muscle here? Like the pectoralis major, or even better, the deltoid. The deltoid muscle, right? You can see the deltoid muscle kind of encompasses like you, just like a big cuff. It starts all the way in the back of your shoulder, comes all the way to the front of your shoulder here. And so this muscle, and you'd be like, oh, it's a pretty expansive muscle. This muscle could do, how does this muscle do shoulder extension and shoulder flexion at the same time, right? How does the deltoid, more so like the deltoid, responsible for being able to bring my arm forward, but also bring my arm backwards, right? Kind of sounds kind of confusing, or not even, yeah, just doesn't seem like it would make sense. But the idea here is like take a look at the front of the shoulder, right? So look at the fibers. Look at the fiber arrangement here. This is the clavicle towards the distal port of the clavicle where the acromion meets. You can see that it inserts down into the deltoid tuberosity of the humerus. And so what you have here is that these fibers would, when they contract, they pull this shorter, right? Like they pull it up, or they'd pull the arm forward, is the idea. So again, you'd see your arm move in the forward direction if you were to contract more of the anterior deltoid. And again, like what would initiate different muscle contractions, right? From anterior delt or lateral delt or even posterior delt. Well, that would be from the brain, right? The brain would signal it. It'd be deciphered out down through those different regions of the spinal cord. The spinal cord would then send the signal down to the motor neurons. But ultimately, what we're looking at here is that fascicular arrangement, right? So look at this. The fibers, you can see the fibers are running in such a pattern that, again here, if we drew our arrows in that, when that muscle contracts, it's going to pull that forward or up. Now on the side, and the side might actually be a little bit easier of a concept to identify here. The point of movement, or the point of axis, is right in the middle here. This is where this is the glenohumeral joint, so it's where the glenoid meets the humerus. This is kind of that center point of axis, the center point of movement, the pivot. And so muscles on the side of the muscles that would be on the lateral of the pivot arm, right, are, or the pivot point, are going to pull the arm, out. Muscles on the side here would pull the arm down, right? And so the muscle here of the deltoid, the one that sits the lateral portion of the deltoid, the middle portion of the deltoid here, has a arrangement, a fascicular arrangement, muscle fiber arrangement that's going to have it pull it up in this direction, right? And ultimately cause the arm to abduct. So what we have here is abduction of the humerus, right? Abduction of the humerus, because this is the shoulder blade. So this is, if we orient ourselves, this direction is medial. So that means, to the right of your screen is lateral. Down is going to be inferior, obviously. I didn't trick you. Didn't flip this person upside down for you. And then medial lateral. And then we're looking at the posterior, right? We're looking at the posterior of this shoulder, identified by, you look, there's the spine of the scapula. So this is the posterior portion of the scapula there. And as a result, when this muscle contracts, what you have is the arm being pulled out or away from the midline, right? So we could even draw that midline all the way over here. Here's our midline right here. And so that's what we mean by the concept of muscles work best in the direction of their fibers, in the direction of their fascicular arrangement. So it helps me to identify the actions of a muscle, like that of maybe the rhomboids, right? Helps me to identify that the actions of a muscle, if a muscle kind of pulls it this way, right? So the fibers are kind of running. I'll kind of make a little arrow there, right? Not arrows, but lines in that direction, right? So the fibers, now I'll draw the arrows, are going to pull it in there. So it would cause the shoulder to kind of retract and maybe even elevate a little bit, right? When this pulls it up, it might retract or elevate. And then another concept that might be helpful to know is that, again, you've got the center point of the shoulder here, kind of the point of axis. So if a muscle were to pull in this direction, it would cause it to go down. It would cause the head or the glenoid of the scapula to go down. And that is referred to as inferior rotation. What else? Downward rotation is also the term for that, right? Inferior downward rotation is another term that's often used for that. But we can even see this. Let's see. I don't know that I have a picture of do I have a picture of the rhomboids here? Yeah. There it is. You can even see this here in the picture provided for us in our cadaver. So this is the medial border of the scapula. Here's our spine, right? And then there's our rhomboids right in the pocket that I've kind of drawn for us there. So then if we zoom into this, maybe I'm gonna have to clear it first. Right, here's the rhomboids again. Let's kind of orient ourselves. There it is, kind of inside the box here, being identified in this arrow. You can see again that fascicular arrangement. The fibers are going to be running in a direction that go from here to here, and you can see that running in that direction, and that's kind of what the artists have been providing us information regarding. You can even see the fibers of the trapezius muscle here that run in 3 different directions, right? You can see this one running more inferior. You can see one that's running a little bit more medial to lateral, right? Medial to lateral. So again, if they contracted, probably pull it in towards the spine. And then the other part here, actually this is probably still a little bit more medial to lateral, but I'll show you here if I clear it all out. There it is. There's more upper trap. So upper trap looks, or upper trapezius muscle. Give it a different color here for a sec. Give it a pink color. Upper trap runs like this, right? The fibers of the upper trap are running up in this direction, and probably not that acute of an angle. It's probably a little bit shorter fibers there. But what does that do? Well, it would elevate the shoulder, right? It'd pull the shoulder up and in, but also in the same capacity, it would probably, with a stationary shoulder, it would pull the head kind of. I'll make the arc motion this way, but as you would see, that's a combination of kind of lateral side bend. Primarily, just I would call it lateral side bend, or excuse me, lateral flexion or side bend. Kind of pretty synonymous terms there. All right, I think I'm gonna finish up this time here. uh, just kind of wrapping up this idea of what we're looking at here as it relates to chapters 9, 10, and 11 as we prepare for the exam next week. Again, I appreciate all your guys' time and hard work and effort throughout this semester as we continue on through the kind of the movement aspects of the human body. We'll take a look at the nervous system in the last few weeks here, one of the more complex systems in all of the body, and I'm excited to review that with you guys. But until then, I encourage you to stay safe and take care. Trying to find my mouse on the screen. Stay safe and take care. I wish you all the best, and I will talk to you soon.